Today's webinar. Oh, hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, which is going to be on teaching writing skills with me, your host. My name is Emma Blackledge. How is everyone doing? Where's everyone joining from today? Could you put a comment saying where you're joining from? I can see a few people posting comments. Great to see. Yeah, great to see you all here. Great. Okay, I'll keep an eye on comments as we go, but for now, let's get started. Let's go to the first slide. It's just an introduction to me and my experience. Oh, we've got some people joining from Mexico, Turkey, Portugal, which is where I am at the moment, Italy, Romania, Orlando, Japan. Oh wow, okay. Wow, a lot of countries are joining us today. That's very exciting. Welcome to everyone. I really hope you enjoy the webinar today. So if we go to the first slide, I'm just going to tell you a little brief bit about my background and experience. My name is Emma. I'm a British English teacher, originally from London. Now I live in beautiful Somerset, and I'm currently doing this webinar from Portugal, from a working holiday, which I know it's very lucky. I've been teaching for 5 years. I've been with italki for 3 years. During that time, I've really developed a specialism in teaching writing in particular. And I find it absolutely wonderful as a specialism. I focus on, developing students' writing skills in a really long-term sense and helping them recognize and implement good writing principles for their own future. And as well as my teaching, my work in writing is really supported by my other freelance work as an editor and proofreader. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So we're going to talk about 4 key areas of teaching writing today. First of all, we're going to assume that everyone is kind of slightly new to this. So I'm going to talk about what makes this a really good niche for teachers. Next, if you're convinced by that, we can talk about whether this is going to be right for you or not, what skills are that you really need, and actually some surprising skills that you don't need. Then we're going to look at the writing teaching itself. What should it focus on? What should it cover? What are the principles of good writing that we can teach to our students? Lastly, we're going to have a little short section on useful tools and resources that are going to make your job as a writing teacher much easier. So, on to the next section, on to the first section, sorry. What makes writing a good niche for teachers? There are many reasons why teaching writing can be a fulfilling, rewarding, versatile teaching specialism. Let's look at a few of them. So, here are some of the key reasons. Firstly, everyone needs writing skills, really everyone, no matter whether you're, working in kind of customer service, answering emails, or you're, quite a high profile lawyer or something like that. You need writing skills. It's part of our everyday communication these days, especially online. So whether you are already a teacher or not, you can adapt your existing teaching to suit writing, whether it's level A1, level C2, or beyond. Furthermore, there are also many subspecialisms that exist within the main skill of writing. We'll go on to talk about these a lot later, but yeah, for now, that's what I'll say. So therefore, you can adapt your existing teaching style to writing because it isn't just a one-size-fits-all approach. We'll go on to talk about this a little bit later as well, but every student is so different. It's a really adaptable, type of teaching. It's also easier to teach online than you might think. I think perhaps a lot of teachers think, oh, it might be difficult to teach writing online because it's just not the same if you're not in the same room as that person. Thanks to the advent of many new technologies, which we will talk about later as well, it's easier than ever to replicate a really interactive, collaborative environment with your student. Okay, and also it can lead to long-term student relationships as well. A student might keep coming back to you to keep developing their writing skills. You really can't, there's no point at which you're finished with your writing skills. So there's always the possibility of continuing to develop. That actually applies to the teachers as well as the students. And it's in really high demand. I actually don't see that many teachers on italki specializing in this. I know that some do, but I think a huge amount, for whatever reason, they don't. Maybe they don't realize it's an option. So yeah, it's worth thinking about if you're one of those. It can be incredibly rewarding. You might have the opportunity that I have on many occasions to to help a student get into their top choice university, to help them land their dream job through a really well-written personal statement. You are that person that facilitates these kind of incredible experiences for them, and you can really take a lot of joy and a lot of satisfaction from that. It also helps you understand English grammar at a deeper level, for sure. I don't think any one of us has a perfect grasp of English grammar, and writing is an area of teaching that really highlights all of those gaps, which is fine. We don't worry about that. We just take it as an opportunity to keep learning. It also promotes your creativity and expands your vocabulary. Last but certainly not least, this point is really important. Writing is an incredibly creative process. You will experience that as well as your student. It's also worth thinking about the fact that, each synonym of a word that you might choose to use has slightly different connotations. And I think writing teaching really helps you appreciate the nuances of those differences. I'm just going to check to see if there's been any kind of key questions at this stage. Otherwise, we'll move on. Yeah, great to see that our other host has invited people to ask questions. I haven't seen any so far, so let's continue. All right, hopefully now you have a good idea of why teaching writing can be a really great specialism on italki. Okay, let's carry on to the second section. This is all about, just waiting for the slide to update. Apologies, just one moment. We have a question from a native Turkish tutor. Yeah, a really valuable comment here. Writing also helps speaking because learning occurs in mind first and writing helps this. Wow, what an eloquent way of putting that. Absolutely. Writing is a thought process. I totally agree with this. Thank you very much, Hakan. Okay. The second section here is about writing teaching. Is it right for you? That's what we're going to focus on here. There's a lot of important skills that you need, and we're also going to talk about areas that you can further specialize. So first of all, we'll look at what skills you need. So on to the next slide. Okay, these first two, they go hand in hand. You need a huge amount of patience and you need great listening skills. I believe that writing teaching is the most personal form of communication that you can experience with a student, because unlike speaking, it really gives you the time to explore your thoughts, your feelings, what you want to say in a deeper and more kind of intimate way. So you really do need to be able to adapt to that. And occasionally your students might not really know what it is that they want to say themselves. So through patience and listening, you will be able to help answer their questions for them. The ability to tailor your lesson to the students' needs. Again, I think this happens at a more acute level with writing teaching than any other kind of teaching, reading, listening, speaking, etc. The situation is so personal and so so variable. So you really need to adapt, and this is also reflected in the next point. You need to have an emotional intelligence to adapt your teaching to the student. You might be working with children, teaching creative writing one day. You might be working on proofreading with a medical student the next day. Those kinds of lessons are going to be really, really different, and you might want to think about that. Or you might want to specialize in one, which we'll come on to in a little moment. You need to have an interest in grammar and a willingness to develop your skills. Absolutely. I don't think, as I've mentioned, no one has a perfect grasp of English grammar, even native speakers, even experienced native speakers. And it really becomes apparent when a student asks you a tricky question about their grammar in their writing. That's fine. I think those situations occur. We just approach these situations with honesty and say, oh, I've never had to actually explain that before. Even though I might understand it as a native speaker, explaining it is something completely different. So you say, okay, I'm just going to quickly Google this for you while we're speaking so that I can give you an answer while we're having this lesson. Last but not least, you need endurance. I think these lesson types can be incredibly intensive. You're engaging at a personal, close, intimate level, one-on-one with a student. A creative process is always a tiring process. So yeah, be prepared for that, and maybe book yourself in a half-hour break every now and then between your lessons on the italki calendar. Okay, let's look at what skills you don't necessarily need to be a good writing teacher. Oh, surprisingly, the first one is to be a great writer yourself. This might be contrary to what some of you might believe at this stage, but I think it's the same as what we experience in any kind of teaching. It's the way that you don't have to be a lawyer to teach lawyers English. You don't have to be a business owner to teach students business English. Yeah, you don't need that. Certainly it might help if you did have those specific skills, but it's not required. You don't have to be a fantastic writer. You just have to have a really strong, interest and desire to help people with it. And last, I've mentioned this a couple of times, so I won't go into this very much, but you don't need a perfect grasp of English grammar. All right, let's carry on. What have we got next? This is about the areas for further specialism. I describe myself as a writing teacher. That's quite a general description, but actually the reality is that there are so many different subcategories of teaching writing, and you might really want to specialize in one. That might help you get noticed by those particular students looking for that exact thing. We could talk about, we could look at children's writing skills, creative writing skills, business writing, exam prep, academic, fiction, formal, CV, personal statement, and I'm sure there are so many others. If you've got any other ideas or you already specialize in something different, share it in the comments. I'd love to hear about what other avenues you already specialize in, or ideas you have for avenues you could specialize in. Okay, but for now we'll go to the next slide, which is about parts of the writing process that you can specialize in. Again, just like with the previous slide, you could teach all of these, but they are really different. It's worth being aware of that because you need to adapt your skills to each of these. I think the writing processes can be broken down into 4 key stages. Pre-writing, when the student comes to you with nothing but maybe the task that they've been given from their university or their school or an idea. That's where you start the brainstorming, planning, and drafting process, structuring, organization. It will all be happening at quite a high level at that stage. The second stage is writing itself. Maybe the student has their plan and they want you to help translate their ideas into fully formed sentences and paragraphs and tie everything together with a really good structure. The third stage is editing and revising, and I'm so sorry, which would involve the student having a draft, maybe a loose draft, maybe a really polished draft, any stage, and you are going to help them really polish it, develop it, help it sing, help it sell what they're trying to sell, help it say what they're trying to say. The final stage is proofreading, which can often get kind of tied into that third stage, but it's also possible to sort of do proofreading as an offline lesson format, which is something you could consider as well. This might involve tidying up any final things, correcting errors, fixing inconsistencies, applying a sort of consistent tone as well. It can, really range. Okay, I think that is the end of the second section. So let's just have a little summary of that with the next slide. So, now that you've heard a little bit more, you might want to kind of cherry pick some of the elements from what we've just been talking about, the subcategories of writing teaching and the parts of the process. You might say, I'm going to be a children's creative writing teacher. I'm going to be actually a proofreader for medical personnel. I'm going to be an editor for lawyers. You can really kind of create a really custom niche by doing it this way. And that's one of the beautiful things about this type of teaching. So now we come on to the third section, which is about the kind of content, the approach, the style, the format maybe of your own teaching lessons. I'm just going to wait for that next slide to load before I continue. Apologies. We're just going to pause for a quick question from someone. Thank you, Walter, for your question. Should the writing exercises be done during the lesson or for homework and then corrected in the following lesson? Really great question. Great question. I always feel as though most writing should be done outside of the lesson. It is a really time-consuming process, and it's also quite intimidating for you to kind of sit there as the teacher and say, okay, do that piece of writing, and then the student has to almost sort of pretend you're not there while they're doing that. Yeah, that can be really tricky for them. So I always say, we'll discuss together in the class, and then homework should be done outside, because it is such a great opportunity for them to practice what you've said during the lesson and apply it independently. I think that opportunity for independent practice is really important, and it's much more time efficient if you can do it outside of the lesson. So yeah, that is by the way, I just want to quickly say that's a really good format for writing lessons, because for one thing, it keeps the student coming back. You give them a piece of homework each week and it's not going to get corrected until the next lesson. That creates a really, a really nice process whereby they look forward to having your feedback and your corrections in the next lesson. Okay, right, so let's go to the third section. Oh, apologies, one more question. Thank you, Anna, for your question. I saw a few teachers that do writing classes, but the students don't need to show up in class. They send the document and the teacher corrects it. Is this a good way to help the student? Absolutely, absolutely. I really, really love this way of working because sometimes the student, maybe they're not looking to really develop their own writing skills in a long-term sense, or maybe they would like to do that, but they don't actually have the time for that at this moment in time. Lots of university students have very hectic schedules. They just want to sort of, final look over their paper that they've put a lot of hard work into, and you can offer that for them. The way that you structure that can be up to you, but you might charge a price per 1,000 words, for example. Calculate the total word count of their document, calculate how many lessons that will take for them to book so that it covers the cost, if you see what I mean. I always invite students to book a lesson when I do it this way so that it doesn't take up my online teaching hours by doing that. Yeah, a great way to help the students, certainly. And Nika has a question. What is the best way to correct grammatical errors in order to keep students motivated at this stage and not make them give up? Wow, these questions are great. And actually, a couple of them are answering things that I was planning on talking about a little bit later. So maybe I'll just quickly go through those when it comes to it. It's a fantastic question and a really important part of writing teaching. You absolutely have to be constructive and encouraging in all of your feedback. It's never a good idea to say, oh no, that's not working, or that's not right, and here's the answer for what is right. They can't, having that sort of very yes no and focusing on the error itself, very black and white kind of teaching, I don't think is very helpful for the student. I don't think it helps them develop their own skills, which is really what we want to focus on, getting them to take ownership of their work, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So correcting grammatical errors in a way that is, first of all, having a little bit of empathy and appreciating that they are doing something that is really, really hard to do, writing in another language, incredibly difficult to do. Personally, I can't do that. I can't write in any other language other than English. So they're doing something that's much more impressive than what I can do. So I think that having that empathy and that level of understanding for what the student has overcome and how much work they've done in order to get to this point helps you be more empathetic and more encouraging in your own feedback. I think we'll go into a little bit more detail, but just to mention as well, lots and lots of detail, lots and lots of examples when you're correcting grammatical errors, so that they feel like not only have they had something corrected, but they've actually been given a new skill to practice in their own writing at a later point. Okay, thanks, Nika. So, thank you, Walter. You're very welcome for that feedback. The next section. What your writing teaching will actually involve. Let's have a little bit of a perspective into the reality of writing teaching, and I apologize in advance if there's any repetition or overlap with any of your questions. So let's go to the next slide. So yeah, where to start? I'm just going to mention at the outset here that I think these types of lessons can take one of two formats. They can either be the student comes to you with a piece of text or an idea that they want to work on, and it's really, really specific. Or the student can come to you and say, I need to develop my writing skills for work, for creativity, for personal reasons, to communicate more formally. They might have any one of these kinds of goals. So what I'm going to try and do is try and approach this in a way that covers both of those types of lessons, but just be aware that, yeah, in reality, the lesson type will take kind of one of those forms. But regardless of that, we always start with I would say about 15 minutes worth of questions minimum with a new student. I sometimes ask many, many more than this. Sometimes the questions go on for a long time, but honestly, I feel like the more questions you ask, the better informed, the better placed you are to help that particular student. The more detail you can find out about what they're writing, why they're writing, who they're writing to, what they think their areas of concern are. These are all really, really useful this is all useful information that you can use to tailor your lesson. So just to run through these quickly, yeah, we need to find out what level the student is currently writing at. In order to assess the student's level, personally, I don't use any kind of online testing, but I'd be really interested to hear if any of you know of any, online writing test that gives you a level for a student. Personally, however, I don't know if I sort of believe in that as a way of writing, because it is as a way of assessing writing, apologies, because it is so varied, it is so personal. So for that reason, I choose to use the IELTS or CAE band descriptors for their writing parts of their exams, which are incredibly detailed. They break down the writing into key components, vocabulary, grammar, tone, task achievement, cohesion, etc. They give you really clear examples of what would be a level, band 5, what would be a band 6. So depending on the level of your student, I'd really recommend looking into those as a way of understanding your student's existing level, and also understanding, how to get them up to that next band. That's super important as well. We've talked a little bit about purpose. It's also really important to identify the audience. The student might not even know this to begin with, but it's something you can work with to identify with them. The deadline, when does this text need to be complete? Even if you're working with a student that doesn't have a particular text in mind, that just has a goal of developing their writing skills, as we know as teachers, it's really important to set goals with fixed deadlines. I want to, let's help you be able to write a letter to your boss by 1 month's time. Things like that. Of course, they can be adjusted as you go, but it's really great to have goals to fix on for the future. I think it really helps students' motivation. And then areas of particular concern, just lastly, what does the student feel most concerned by in their writing currently? It's worth bearing in mind that students might feel concerned about something that actually you don't agree with, that you don't think is a concern. But either way, it's really revealing to hear their thoughts on their own writing. Okay, next slide, please. The principles of good writing. Wow, there's a huge amount to say here. And in a way, it's sort of difficult to talk about principles of good writing, because I do believe that writing is an incredibly subjective process. I might believe that a particular book is beautifully written, someone else might completely disagree. It really is hugely subjective. However, it is useful to think about the 4 cornerstones, the 4 C's of good writing, objectively good writing, something that an examiner would say is good writing. I believe that those are clarity. This is the most important thing. Is the student saying what they want to say? And if not, how can we change what the writing says to reflect their intended meaning as closely and as clearly as possible? The next is coherence, which is about the logic and the consistency of the writing. Is the tone consistent? Does everything logically follow along? Next, we have cohesion, which is relating to the structure and the organization of the writing. Do we have a smooth flow of going all the way through? Does one paragraph link into the next? Are there parts or ideas that seem oddly placed? Next, we have conciseness. I think this is a really important one. And actually, I'll just refer us over to Stephen King, who has an excellent quote about this. When your story is ready for rewrite, cut it to the bone. Get rid of every ounce of excess fat. It's quite an extreme point of view, but he does have a good point. Conciseness makes everything easier for the reader. They can understand what the author is saying without any extra words getting in the way, and the writing benefits from that. I've included a few other categories as well, in case you do decide to specialize in maybe something like exam prep writing for the IELTS, or if you specialize in creative writing. So we also want to focus on the intent and the relevance of the writing. Does it answer the question that's been given? The vocabulary and the grammar also, goes without saying, really important parts. We should look at a variety of vocabulary. We should look at a variety of grammatical sentence structures as well. And then I've just included that lovely principle of show, don't tell. And I love this quote from Anton Chekhov over on the right-hand side, who says, "Don't tell me the moon is shining. Show me the glint of light on broken glass." Beautiful. Okay, unless anyone has any questions at this stage, we will continue. Okay, how do we approach teaching writing? We kind of know a little bit more about the skills that we're looking for, the skills that we want to implement with the students. But how do we approach it as teachers? I think the most important thing is to create a collaborative and non-judgmental environment where the student feels comfortable. This is really important because the student might come to you feeling slightly embarrassed about sharing their writing in the first place. This happens to me quite often. And I, as quickly as possible, try to reassure them that there will be no judgment, whatever the topic is, whatever the level is that you're writing at, there will be no judgment from me. I'm purely here to help you improve. It's good to break down that barrier early on, I think. Next, I think it's so important to give the student ownership of their work. I'm slightly repeating myself, but explaining not just the change that you're making or the idea that you're suggesting, but really explaining why. Lots and lots of examples of why this might be good, and just lots of generate lots of kind of open discussion with your student as well. They might disagree with you. They might be really, really firm about sort of keeping something that you think should be changed. In my view, I think in that case we go with the student. I'm not here to sort of force my views on the student. But either way, sort of helping them have that sense of ownership, the sense that they can take the skills that you're giving them and apply it to the next piece of writing that they do with greater success. That is something that kind of, when they see that kind of progress, they come back to you and they want more of that. Asking lots of questions from a reader's perspective to test the structure and organization. You play a key role as the writing teacher. You also play the first reader of their work. So you can act as a reader would, even if you don't know much about the subject itself. I think that's really true. Someone could be writing a dissertation about biochemistry. You might not have a background in biochemistry. I certainly don't, but it's still needed, that it's still necessary for you to be able to understand what the student is sharing, the ideas that they're sharing, the research question that they're identifying. All of those things, they should be apparent. So you need to ask lots and lots of questions to really interrogate that. Have they explained things as clearly as they can? Because if it doesn't make sense to you, maybe it wouldn't make sense to another reader either. I've mentioned this as well, but I will just repeat myself. Set homework every week, and just an extra thing as well. I always try and use tasks that are as close to real life as possible. If I'm working with an interior designer, I will ask that student to write a letter to a potential client offering their services and explaining, what kind of approach they would use in their interior design if they got that job. Anything that you can do to make things as tailored as possible is always really appreciated by the student. And I have said this a couple of times, but you always need to be as encouraging as possible and not as sort of, not sort of too harsh with your criticism or your feedback, unless maybe the student is, clearly is very open to that. And the reason is just because writing is a hard process, even for native speakers, even in our own language. Even when we like writing, it's still a hard process. I'm sure most of you will be able to empathize with that. So yeah, I think it's important to be as encouraging as possible. All right, let's answer a couple of questions. Oh, okay. Fatima has a great question. I sometimes underline the error and ask them to find out what could be the correct form. Yeah. So I'm assuming we're speaking grammatically here. I'll just I'll sort of interpret this question as a sort of grammatical question. So we're talking perhaps about the correct verb form. Yeah, this is great. I like that idea actually, because you're sort of engaging the student in the correction process themselves, which is really a smart idea, because then if they can get the answer right without you telling them the answer, to them that feels like a real win. They might have made an error, but they also fixed the error. They spotted the error. You might have kind of pointed them to the error, but they were the one that fixed it. So I really like that approach. Yeah, it's something that I find does work really well, particularly with students of a certain level. Great approach. I think that's great. So Sita says, I see the students boggled up with the writing habits. Love that expression. How do I calm them and encourage them? Okay, I assume we're talking about a sort of stress, a feeling of stress here, aren't we? Okay, I think it's important to recognize that writing does not improve overnight. Absolutely not. It's a really long-term skill. Nevertheless, you can set sort of short-term goals to help them feel that sense of progress and encouragement if they are feeling a little bit too stressed about it. I would say, look, today we are really going to master, I don't know what it might be for your students, but an introduction to a letter, concluding an essay. We're really going to master this one skill. Keep things focused. That way it feels like a continuous, gradual journey rather than, oh my gosh, I need to know everything about writing and I need to know it right now. Breaking it down into small, digestible goals and steps, I think is the best approach to that. Yeah, I'd be interested to hear if anyone has any other thoughts on that, but that's my view. All right, let's, oh wow, we've got a great question here. What can help me as a teacher be confident enough to do writing teaching, especially as a teacher who has only had 10 lessons? Right, so new teachers, great. Yeah, great to hear from you. Thank you very much. And it's great to hear that you're interested in teaching writing. I think start with what you know. Start with what you know. You might be a new teacher, but you're not new to the world of writing. You're an adult. You've had experience writing all kinds of things. What is it that interests you about writing? Would you prefer to teach children, you know, um, you know, sort of essay writing and a kind of low level essay writing? Would you prefer to teach creative writing to teenagers? I think it's important to identify something that interests you and start from there, because to help that sense of confidence. And I do remember that process happening for me myself. I initially thought, well, I've never had anything published. How can I help someone who's trying to have their dissertation published in this excellent journal? But of course, it didn't start there. It started with emails. I felt like I got emails. I understood how to write a British email, a very British style email. So I started there because it was something that I'd had experience in way before my teaching even began. So thank you so much for those questions. Really interesting, and it's so great to hear from you all. We are going to move on to the next slide now. So I've thrown this slide in because I'm aware that what we've been talking about so far has been very, very general and high level. So I just wanted to give us a bit of a case study. Let's imagine that we have a student that says, I want to improve my email writing skills. You might be thinking, well, how do I put a lesson plan together so that this student, feels motivated, keeps coming back, and also learns something every time? Here's a breakdown of maybe what I would suggest. Of course, this is completely adaptable, but something along these lines could work well. We might have the first lesson focusing on formal and informal vocabulary, identifying the differences between the two, which is appropriate for which kind of email, maybe, two categories of formal and informal words and their equivalents to each other. Something like that could be great. The homework should always focus on the content of that lesson. So I've suggested, underlining and changing all the informal words to appropriate formal ones in a sample email. Lesson 2, we might focus on a specific part of the email. This can also, be applied to other forms of writing, but I'm just going to stick with this particular case study for now. The different aspects and components of the email. Why not start with the introduction, how to write that great opening sentence, that kind of how to address someone in a way that is appropriate to their role and your relationship. Lesson 3, we might focus on grammar. So by this point, you will have seen a lot of the students' own writing from their homework tasks. You will have a better idea of what their areas of weaknesses and strength are. So you can say, I've noticed that you maybe use the present continuous form when maybe you shouldn't. So let's look at that specifically today, and it will help them feel like they've kind of mastered something. Lesson 4, you might focus on the email etiquette and the level of politeness that is appropriate. I know that in the UK, we have a really specific idea of what makes a polite email and how to accidentally sound passive aggressive by using the word please in the wrong place in the sentence or something. So I always think that's a really important part of email writing, especially with students that are learning British English. But I'm sure, of course, certain cultures have other expectations for the email as well. So that would be interesting to get into. And then lesson 5, we might focus on the process of editing and proofreading your own emails. This is something that every student needs, especially when they're writing every single day and they don't have a huge amount of time to sit on an email. They have to kind of get it done and get it sent. Yeah, the process of catching your own errors, tidying, making final revisions is really important and can make the difference between a good email and a great email. Okay, let's move to the next slide. So just a summary, that was quite a long section, wasn't it? But just some key points. I think the most important things: listen carefully, keep listening carefully, keep asking questions as well to make your lessons as tailored as possible. Remember the 4 C's of good writing, and also look out for them whenever you're reading. This will help you become really familiar with them and be able to identify each one. I think that's a great idea. Lastly, be prepared to do a lot of Googling of grammatical concepts. Yes, especially, I will just quickly mention that in English, there's the rules, we've got the grammatical rules, and then we've got the exceptions to the rules, and then we've got the kind of grey areas. So sometimes it's not quite as simple as offering an yes or no answer, or this or that answer. It's a case of much more detailed kind of discussion and explanation. So yeah, it might take a bit of Googling. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So for our final section today, we're just going to look at a few useful tools and useful resources. The aim of these is always to make your lessons as engaging and as close to real life as possible. So for the first slide, we will look at some useful tools. With these tools, interactivity is absolutely key. So screen sharing is okay, but file sharing is better. Let me just explain what I mean by that. I've had several students come to me, and when we start working in a shared file, they seem a little bit surprised. They're like, oh, my previous tutor only used to share their screen with me, which is fine, and if that's all that you have available to you, that is absolutely fine. You can, as long as you do it as long as you manage it well, that's fine. But I think it's limiting. The student doesn't have any kind of control or input to that file. All they see is kind of what you're showing them. So using something like Google Docs to share a file, make the student an editor of the file as well, so they can highlight words, they can type notes, maybe even in their own language, they might want to type notes. They can, kind of contribute to the discussion, and it feels more collaborative. It feels more like 2 equal parties, So I think it's a fantastic way of working. I use Google Docs, except for students in China, for whom I use Microsoft Office SharePoint. Apologies. And basically, this is a really similar way of working to Google Docs. The only thing is, I will admit, it's not quite as kind of quick and fluid and as immediate as Google Docs. When I type something in Google Docs, my student sees it immediately. When I type something in Microsoft Office SharePoint, my student might see it 20 seconds later or something like that. So there's that. However, for students in China, at the moment, that's the best thing it's the best resource that I've come across. But there's probably others out there. If you've got any others that you know of, please share them in the comments. It would be fantastic to hear some other ideas, because as we know, technology is kind of escalating and escalating. So I'm sure there's really good other examples as well. Okay, so let's go on to the last section of this, the last slide of this section, which is about resources. So resources for editing. There's a couple of tools I'm aware of. Again, if you know of any others, please, put them in the comments. I use Grammarly and Pro Writing Aid as a sort of final checker for my own work. If you're slightly more new to the process and you're worried about your own grammatical abilities, checking a student's writing with one of these tools can really take the pressure off. You might know maybe like 95% of what the errors are, and it helps you feel more prepared for the lesson. Absolutely. A couple of resources to learn more about writing. This webinar, we've only been able to kind of scrape the, what's that phrase? Scrape the top of the iceberg. But basically, there are some great ways of learning more about writing. The first is to practice it yourself. The great thing about this is that it really does help you develop that sense of empathy when you're working with your students, because you will realize for yourself, it's much easier to teach writing than it is to do writing. Yeah. The next best thing you can do is to read everything and anything, read lots, read often. If you read the newspaper already, fantastic. If you don't and you want an idea for what to read, it's often said that The Economist, which is the newspaper, is known for fantastic writing, so that might be a great place to start. You can read books about writing in particular as well. I'm currently reading a book called Good with Words by Patrick Barry, which is available to read online for free. Hopefully that link will work for you. Yes. You can also take an online course to help with that issue of confidence that someone mentioned earlier. The British Council has a lot, and I know that there are many other online resources. It might just take a little bit of Googling. But if you are planning on specializing in something particular, like IELTS or, you know, something like that, then a course can be really helpful. It's designed, you know, specifically to address that type of writing. Okay, we will now move on to some final questions. Oh, thank you so much, Fatima, for your input. Quillbot is perfect. Oh, I've heard that word before, but I've never quite got to the point of looking it up. Thank you so much. Anthony Papa says that there is also Apple sharing. Wow, I've never heard of that, but that sounds interesting. If everyone that you're working with uses an Apple product, I'm assuming, but maybe not even necessary to have that. But great, these ideas are great, and I'm actually going to write them down. Thank you so much. Okay, Nika had the question, what should be considered when assessing students' level in writing? Okay, yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much for this question. So let's assume that we're working with a student where it's not quite obvious what their age is. It's important to find out, you know, are they in high school? Are they in university? Are they working? We need to take their background and their context, the context of their, you know, their studies into account. It's also worth really finding out when they started learning English, what their journey has been like with English so far, so that you can put everything into context. You know, a student that's writing at a you know, A2 level, you might initially think, well, okay, they've got a way to go. But maybe if they only started learning English 6 months ago, then that's great for them, you know. So we need to take into account a lot of details about their background. Also, you know, if they're working, what industry they're working in. Yeah, as much information as you can find out about their background, I think would be really helpful. Yes, and then just looking at those kind of band descriptors or something similar to really help you say, you know, well, regardless of your age, at the moment we can kind of objectively say that you're writing at a band 5 in IELTS, and you can kind of explain, you know, that's pretty good, but you might have an aim to get even higher. Okay, any final questions? Okay. Oh, Vanessa has a really interesting question. How about intermediate plateau students where you can see zero progress even after months of writing practice? I personally have a hard time striking the balance between encouragement and honesty. Wow. Yeah, I can really relate to this. Yeah, that's a really tough situation. Intermediate plateau students. So I think it's always the case that if you are seeing zero progress, it's worth really changing something up, you know. Maybe getting back first of all to the goal that they initially had, you know, talking about that goal, reliving the reality of that goal. You know, what will it be like for you when you can, you oh, apologies, I think we disappeared for a second there. Anyway, never mind. Yeah, getting back to the goal, really, you know, thinking about the kind of tangible benefits that will happen when that goal is realized. It might just be that they've lost motivation, and of course that does happen. It could also be worth, as I mentioned earlier, sort of switching things up in your lessons. Come at something from a different angle. I actually have an IELTS student at the moment, and after months and months of kind of churning out these IELTS essays, I realized that, you know, she was just incredibly bored by the whole process. Now we are working on creative writing as a way of unlocking, you know, that creativity and that sort of innate kind of relationship with writing. I think I just wanted to get her back that relationship with writing rather than it feel like a real chore. So take a couple of months and just change things completely. I think that could really help. I hope that's helpful, but I really do understand that issue, and it's difficult. Okay, so one more question and we will wrap up. So thank you, Cork, for your question. As a teacher, how would you go about delineating the students' writing skills versus language skills? That's a really interesting question. Thank you. I think I do see them as really quite separate. Um, I've had so many students where their speaking skills have been almost impeccable, and then when it comes to putting pen to paper or fingers to keyboard, they just cannot, they cannot express themselves. It's that kind of, suddenly it doesn't feel quite so fluid anymore, or the other way around, that absolutely happens as well. So I think it's sort of, oh, it's a tough question, because I think it's important to talk about the link between the skills when you are working with a student. Talking about writing, practicing the speaking skills is really important. But also, I'm almost tempted to say that writing should be treated as almost kind of like a slightly separate skill from the others. It's, you don't have that opportunity with any other form of English, of any language learning, to have the time and the opportunity to express yourself in a more careful, more planned, more methodical way. So yeah, I think that really helps explain why speaking and writing skills are so different to each other. So I'm wondering if I'm quite answering Cork's question, but yeah, I think it's important to help them recognize that even if they are struggling with their writing, it might help to say, well, your other skills are really excellent. We just have this one to work on. Or if they're doing really well at their writing, looking at ways that can help influence the other skills as well. But yeah, I do think there's a little bit of separation that we can take with writing. It is just a different form of expression. Okay, I think we have. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm glad that they were practical tips. Oh, some lovely feedback coming in. Thank you everyone for these comments. Um, Great. So all that's left is for me to wish you all the best of luck in your future writing teaching. It's possible for you all to be fantastic writing teachers, and I hope you consider it now after this webinar. So thanks so much for watching, everyone. And yeah, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Wow, lovely feedback. Thank you so much, Walter. Remember, you can always come and look at the webinar on YouTube later to catch up.